I can guarantee you, for people who's been requesting me to do more reviews from the show, you probably didn't expect me to do a review of Good Wilt Hunting, and you expect me to review other material like Destination Imagination or stuff like that. But the thing is, with this being a week dedication to the show and not a month, I had to do what I could. Besides, I was planning on doing the review of this two-part episode eventually, whether it's this month or the months later on. Besides, I think this is pretty much a good way to wrap up Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends Week. For every 5 years, Foster's do a reunion celebration for creators and imaginary friends to reunite after 5 young years. And to be quite honest, it's actually a good thing to have this episode starts off because out of all the imaginary friends, Wilt isn't with his creator. And with the amount of questions he cannot handle due to his past, he decides to set things straight, leave Foster's, and go on his journey to go against his enemy in the game of basketball. If you're a fan of basketball, then this is the episode for you. And in the majority of this episode, while Wilt is trying to get to his destination, Mac and the others get inside the bus so that they can find him. Throughout this episode, two-part to be exact, I really think of what they did in this episode really shows how much that they want to put their attention on Wilt. And the good thing is, when it comes to supporting characters like Blue and the others, they're not really flanderized for this episode. I mean, there was obviously moments that I'm going to get to later, but for what this episode has to offer, mainly the fact that it's a two-parter, I really enjoy of how they tried to take this situation seriously involving Wilt's past. And considering that this episode is 44 minutes long, Wilt decides to do some yard work by helping a farmer with his stack of hay, many stacks of hays actually, while also just trying to find an imaginary friend for a family. Well, granted, I can tell that what they're trying to do is to have Wilt be sympathetic, but for the episodes I've seen in the past involving him being nice to other people and the fact that his personality is considered one of the best from the show, I can still say that these two subplots involving Wilt is still filler. Granted, he's still trying to head his way to his destination and the fact that it's a long way to get to there. But at the same time, when it comes to other cartoons, and especially from episodes from this show, there's always a time skip on the characters heading to their next destination. I mean, the moments involving Wilt and the other citizens that he comes across are eventually heartwarming, especially the conversation they had with the people in jail. But I can really tell that for what this episode has to offer and how it tries to be special, they really want to actually put some filler into it in order to make it work. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not an issue, but compared to seeing Wilt just doing hay work and also mowing the lawn, those are literally the only two bits that I didn't like. But everything else, like his conversation with the prison people, along with his mission to save an imaginary friend for a family, does kind of work in order to make his motivations work, in order to make his creator proud. Speaking of his creator, we see Wilt and his creator during the flashbacks, and his name is Jordan. And considering that this is basketball that Wilt is accustomed to because of his imaginary friend, they're really a good team when it comes to basketball. But unfortunately, this leads to a devastating flashback during the end of the special while Wilt and his creator lost. Not to mention that Wilt's arm and eye has been broken due to the size of the enemy's imaginary friend. And the enemy's imaginary friend is nothing more but a basketball for a head. And his name is Fall Larry. And in all honesty, the fact that this is actually the villain that Wilt needs to beat in a game of basketball at the end really makes this a really good way to actually show how sympathetic Wilt is on the fact that he just wants to set things right, despite the fact that, unlike the game that he played with Jordan against Larry and his creator, it's just basically a one-on-one match. Which, in all honesty, I can really tell that that's basically Wilt's way of just handling things personally with Larry. For my opinions on the imaginary friends that make a one-time appearance or multiple-time appearances, I can say that Fall Larry is probably one of the best ones I've seen. Mainly the fact that he's basically a tool that Wilt needs to work with, but also a really interesting tool considering that Wilt and him are basketball players. And for anyone who's interested in sports and that kind of stuff, I don't consider sports as a major issue with a character that has accustomed to as a tool. And all honestly, it really makes basketball really entertaining. Granted, I'm not a fan of basketball, but the game between Wilt and Fall Larry playing basketball is really entertaining, especially the struggle that Wilt needs to deal with in order to set things right for not only for himself, but also for his creator. The other plot involving the others just trying to find Wilt is also entertaining as well, since that they need to find hits in order to find Wilt and where he was during his destination to play a basketball game with Larry, against Larry actually. And considering that Blue being Flanders-wise, he isn't as terrible in this episode, and when it comes to the other characters, mainly Eduardo and his career is pretty much one of my favorite parts when it comes to outside of Wilt's story in this special. Nina, who is the police officer's name, has a backstory when it comes to her bravery thanks to Eduardo, because she keeps getting picked by bullies and she uses Eduardo for her own protection. And then when the bullies pick on Eduardo, Nina decides to be brave and completely throws sand at the other boys in order to become brave, just like Eduardo. However, unlike Eduardo, she isn't afraid whatsoever, which really makes her past really good to actually sympathize her relationship with Eduardo. There's also one gag involving her giving tickets to Frankie because of her driving to different state to state and the fact that she's just rushing through things, and this is something a police officer would do in real life, but for how many times it's been done, it's not really clever, humorous writing if you ask me. I mean, with all the stuff that Frankie has been through the majority of this show, and the fact that in this episode she's just trying to drive and she was this close to driving the bus around without even bothering to help Wilt, finding Wilt, I can tell that she's just trying to do what's right for the other imaginary friends, which really shows on what we're going to find out in Destination Imagination once I get to it in the future. Speaking of Frankie, we get two characters who create Coco, and their names are Douglas and Adam, and all they do is just go against each other so that they can win Frankie's heart, which is something that a nerd would do if you saw my review involving my life as a teenage robot of the Sheldon episodes. However, I really don't find this subplot entertaining whatsoever. I don't know if it's the fact that they're in this special because they're the one who created Coco or found Coco, or the fact that they're just here just to have some comedy in this episode. And in all honesty, I really found this type of comedy not that good. I mean, granted, they don't go a little too far with this, especially the fact that we don't get to see these two characters again afterwards. But compared to episodes I've seen involving Frankie, especially in Frankie My Dear Well, she has multiple crushes going on at once, this isn't really new whatsoever, and it's just reusing ideas from previous seasons. By the way, the bit of we get a different animation style while Douglas and Adam see Frankie as that, it's not really that funny. Besides, when it comes to my opinion on attractive characters, I don't find Frankie that attractive, especially when it comes to her wage moments. Yes, I don't blame her that much, but at the same time, I honestly think that this type of humor just isn't for me whatsoever. But other than that, I can still go back to watch this special despite the flaws I've mentioned. And considering that the flaws are considered insignificant and the plot is the biggest highlight of this special, I really think that this is one of my favorite episodes from the show, and I think that anyone who's a fan of the show can agree with me since it's their favorite as well. I do consider these scenes, despite being filler, pretty much a driving point of what Wilt's character is. Since that he's fully nice and he's just isn't the type of person who would get instantly angry. I can say that if he was replaced by a different character, these types of subplots in this episode won't work. Mainly Wilt doing the law work, like mowing the lawn, finding an imaginary friend, not to mention playing the basketball game against Larry would never work. Because as far as I'm concerned, basketball player or not, he really knows how to actually handle a situation in a calm way when he's not taking the situation seriously. But compared to his basketball game against Larry, is where we get to see the seriousness from his character, because during his flashback, Larry was about to squash Jordan after completely hitting the shoot in the basket. So Wilt pushes Jordan out of the way, which causes his arm and eye to be broken up, which is why he's one-armed and one-eyed, if that makes any sense. Which is the most devastating memory of his life because they lost. So much that he has to run away so that he doesn't have to be ashamed of what happened, and being ashamed in front of his creator. But years later, while Wilt completely plays the basketball game again against Larry, he loses because Jordan actually pulled him out of the way. Because he's just trying to find Wilt in order to set things right with him, despite the fact that they lost the game. But Wilt is too ashamed, so he runs away. Which pretty much explains onto why Wilt ended up at Foster's without anyone knowing about who his creator was, since the reunion celebration comes every 5 years. If there was ever a reunion when it comes to this type of plot involving a person running away to get away from his problems, while the other person is just trying to be nice and actually set things properly with the person that they're close to, even if they're imaginary friends or not, is well, I think that they should take notes from this episode alone. You can tell that the sympathetic from Wilt is what really drives this special and why he's the star of this special, because as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to other characters, they don't come close to what Wilt does. I did say that I do want more backstory involving the other imaginary friends, but if we actually did, I can guarantee you that they won't come close to what we've seen from Wilt in this special alone. If there was ever an episode or special or a few that can actually make up with all the bad things that the show did in the past, I can say that this episode is definitely one of them. Granted, this show is supposed to be its own thing, even back in 2004 to 2009, but compared to what I see in other episodes from this week and in this episode recently, I can say that this show could have done a lot more better onto why it's one of the best cartoons in the 2000s. But I'm gonna get to those bad episodes and good episodes in the future, because as of now, I really think that wrapping up this week involving Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends with this episode is a great way to end off. I give this episode a 9 out of 10. That wraps up Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends week, and don't worry, there are still 2 more reviews I have in store for this month, so just wait until I upload those videos, and yes, I am going to be reviewing more episodes from this show in the future. Next month, I can guarantee you that the requests that I keep giving involving this episode, there is no turning back from this, and you desperately want me to see my critique on it. Just wait until the following month, and once that video is uploaded, the wait will be totally worth it.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole crew, we live with no rules. Let's get this started again. So if you feel like me too, there's only one thing to do. Let's go! Pay down, call the taxi cab. Got a case in the fridge and a bottle at the crib. Let's all get twisted, double fisting, drink up, no resisting. Let's get this started again. Let's get this started again. Let's